Welcome to Genetics Decoded. I'm your host, Sharon Palmer, where we take your genetic information and we look at it from a health point of view, how you can start to engage with personalised health care. Today, we're going to be looking at detoxification. There are so many people out there undertaking a whole range of detoxification interventions. It is quite staggering as to how much people are spending. I went and looked at some research, and in 2023, so this year alone, more than $5 billion worldwide has been spent on detoxification. And it is estimated that this is going to double by 2030. So $10 billion being spent on trying to detox. And it's scary because most of what people are trying, it is not working. And what I want to do today is use your genetics to really help you understand this process of detoxification, like how is the body detoxing? How is your genetics impacting on the function of all of your detoxification enzymes, and how you go about getting it right? Because we really are living in quite a toxic environment these days. It's really important to understand, but more importantly, to get it right. Podcast today is all around detoxification. If any of you have been listening to any of my previous podcasts, you're going to realize this is a little bit of a kind of a bugbear for me. I have some real issues around how detoxification is being presented to the market, because at the end of the day, I think most of it is not working. So what I wanted to do was really do a whole podcast really focusing in on detoxification. What is it? And, how can you really make a difference here? But if we're talking about detoxification kind of in broad terms, I think the first question to ask is are we toxic? Is that why we're going down this pathway? Billions of dollars are being spent globally around detoxification programs, products. And there must be an underlying belief system that there's this need for detoxification. And look, it really is one of the most important processes in the body. It's happening 24/7. It's not just happening when you decide to do your detox program. So I want to kind of really look at what is that program? How is it working? But I thought I would start by going, are we toxic? And do we really need to make sure that, we are on some level really supporting this pathway? And I'm going to go through, I've gone in and looked at some of the research, and it is a little bit scary, a little bit concerning. Pretty much everyone is toxic. That's what we're seeing from some of these researchers is they've gone in and we're all carrying this toxic burden. I'm going to give you some really specifics here. So we're seeing that it's not a matter of if, it's really a matter of how much. So research has shown that 100% of people, so that was everyone, carried some level of toxins within their fat cells, 100%. 91 to 98% of people had 9 chemicals, including things like benzene, toluene, chlorobenzene, ethylbenzene. Benzene is really tied into petrol metabolism, so a lot more ubiquitous in our environment now. Things like dioxins and DDE, which is a kind of a metabolic byproduct of DDT. 83% of people had PCBs. 76% of people had more than 20 toxic compounds in their body. And what that meant that for every gram of fat, there was the equivalent of 25 milligrams of these toxins in our fat. That's a really high number. That's a lot of toxins being stored within our body. In the United States, when they've done this kind of research, there was a mixture of pesticide residues. They were isolated in every single person that was tested. So again, high levels of these pesticides. But of course, what are we using on our crops and on our fruit and veggies? A whole range of different pesticides. And in the US, There are close to 80,000 chemicals that are registered with the EPA, and there's almost no human research on the impact on humans. So we've got all of these chemicals in our environment. We don't really know what they're doing, but what we're discovering is that there's a lot within our tissues. So that was done on adults. What about children? Like, are our children carrying a toxic burden? Again, they did a study on 4-year-old children. 70% of them had DDT. Now, we haven't used DDT for maybe about 50 or so years. And so what you're seeing is so many of the chemicals in our environment are persistent. They're showing up in our children 50 years after we've stopped using them. And 50% of 4-year-old children had PCBs. What about newborn babies? You think, no way, no, please don't tell me that they've also got a toxic burden. The answer is yes. Researchers did a study where they took the umbilical cord blood from newborn babies, so not even a day old, and they analysed it for what kind of chemicals were showing up in this umbilical cord blood. 100% of newborn babies had some kind of chemicals, 100%. Over 287 different chemicals were isolated from that cord blood. On average, each baby had over 200 chemicals. So, of course, this is because, this baby is being developed within the mum is providing that blood, and of course, if mum is toxic, then these things are being passed during that development phase. So of those 200 chemicals that each baby was shown to have, 28 of them were from waste products, 47 of them were from consumer products. So these were things like cosmetics and fragrances. So all of the skincare products that we're using, all the perfumes that we're spraying, we're finding them in newborn babies, and over 200 chemicals were around pesticides as well, and again, the ones that were banned 50 years ago. So what we're seeing is that we're living in a very kind of polluted, toxic environment. Our use of chemicals and pesticides is really high, and we are seeing that they are within our system, not just within adults, but in our children and our newborn babies. And I think that should make all of us be considered here around, our detoxification pathways are under an enormous burden, certainly burdened with things that weren't in our environment, 200, 300 years ago. And it makes me think that we should be really focusing in on supporting this detoxification pathway. But when I look at what people are doing and how they're going about it, what I realize is most of the time we're not having any impact. And that's not a good outcome. If we're going to go through this process, we really want to see that at the end of the day, we can really support this detoxification, getting some of these chemicals and pesticides out of the body. But it's not just these environmental chemicals that your body is needing to detox. During the course of your own body working, your own metabolism, you're throwing off all of these metabolic byproducts that your body has to clear. And if any of you are using any kind of prescription medication or even over-the-counter medication, again, your own body's detoxification system is involved in that. So your detox system is working incredibly hard, working on clearing out just the byproducts that it makes from living, the things in your environment, and any drugs that you might be taking to support your health. When we talk about toxins, like, where in the body do we store them? Like, are they all over the place, or do they kind of get put into special tissues and organs? It really is our fat cells, our adipose tissue, in which we love to store these toxins. Your body knows that these toxins are essentially inherently damaging and dangerous. This is why you've got a detoxification system. Your body wants to package these things up and get them out. But if you can't get them out, so maybe that system is not working particularly well and your genetics is playing a really big role there, but maybe it's overburdened. You're living a very polluted environment, and it'll be a combination. If your body can't effectively get rid of these toxins, its plan B is, let me put them in a place where they're going to do the least amount of damage. And what it does is it stores them in your fat cells. And so researchers have also gone that, some of our obesity epidemic may be the body's need to be kind of storing and sequestering these toxins away. But for any of you who are on a weight loss program where you're actively losing and burning body fat, your body is under an enormous toxic burden at that point. We talked about how many milligrams of these toxins are in every gram of body fat. So if you're burning a few kilos, there's a lot of these toxins being released. And once they're released out of that body fat, they're within the circulation. And now they've got the real opportunity to do you harm. And what I'm kind of seeing in the marketplace right now is this absolute Ozempic craze that everyone's taking this Ozempic drug. I'm already kind of starting to see when you turn on the TV or you look, you can almost start to see the people like, I think they're going down that pathway. And again, these people are losing a lot of weight, in a lot of body fat in a very short period of time. And of course, these toxins are now at a point where they can really damage the body. We throw around the term detoxification. Oh, I'm going on a detox. Or I'm going to try and get heavy metals out. Like, people talk about detoxification quite frequently. But I want you to think about, what is that detoxification process? Have you ever really thought how your body gets rid of these toxins and clears them out? And it's actually a very complicated system. And when we think of detox, most people will go, my liver is responsible for my detoxification. And yes, that answer is partly right. Your liver is playing a really big role in your detoxification, but it is really what we call your detoxification enzymes. You have a lot of these detoxification enzymes within the liver, but these detoxification enzymes are buried all over the body. They are in your brain, they're in your breast tissue, they're in your skin. And, so detoxification is a whole body process. And if you're wanting to effectively detox, it is this enzyme system that you have to understand and you have to support. And of course, your genetics is playing a role in how these enzymes that are all over the body, how effectively are they working? Before any of you do another detox program, and here in Australia it's spring, so everyone goes, good time to detox, I want you to ask yourself 4 questions. One, I think we need to let go of the fact that, as I said, we don't just detox when we decide to do a detox program. But if you're really serious around detoxing and you want it to be effective, I want you to start by asking yourself 4 questions. First question, what do you want to detox? What is it that you want to clear out through the body? And I know you say, I want it all to go. And yes, on some level, that's a good objective, but that's a huge undertaking as well. We've just seen what our toxic burden is. We see we've got all of these different chemicals. What is it that you're wanting to detox? Maybe some of you have done a hair tissue mineral analysis and someone said to you, you've got too many of these heavy metals. Maybe you want to decrease those heavy metals. Maybe you're a farmer and you've had high exposure to certain pesticides. Maybe you want to get rid of those. So start by thinking what it is that you want to clear out through the body. And I know that seems like a bit of an undertaking, right? No, I just want to detox. And I'm asking you to be a little bit more specific. And there's a reason for that. Question number 2 is, what organ or tissue do you want to detox? And again, I know you're going to go, I want to do the whole body. I want to clear everything out of everywhere. But again, that's a really big undertaking. And you want to think about what organ do you really want to focus in on. So let's give an example. If you've got a neurodegenerative disease, so maybe you've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia or Parkinson's or MS, is that we know that these chemicals and pesticides within the brain can be a real driver around neurodegeneration. And so you might go, wow, I've just been diagnosed or I've got a family history of that. I want to go in and really make sure that I can get these things out of my brain. And that way, because what we know is that you've got certain detoxification enzymes that sit in your brain. And if you want to clear them out of your brain, we want to focus on making sure those enzymes are working. And those enzymes will be different to the enzymes that may be sitting in your breast tissue if you're a woman and you're trying to make sure that if you're on HRT, that estrogen metabolism is safe and effective. So you want to kind of know what you're wanting to get rid of, what tissue you want to target, because then your genetics allows you to go, what is the enzyme that is sitting within that tissue? Which enzyme is clearing that particular substrate, that particular toxin? And your genetics can then tell you how well is it working. And then that's when we get the chance to really do something quite significant. Now we know this is not working and these are the things that we can do to make it work better. And you then really do have the capacity to get rid of these toxins, but you can't do everything all at once. There might be one area that you want to focus on more than another, and that really varies from individual to individual. So just to recap, the 4 questions to ask yourself. Number 1, what do I want to get rid of out of the body? What toxin or compound? Number 2, which tissue or organ do I want to get these compounds out of? Number 3 is, what is the enzyme that is responsible for detoxing that tissue and that compound? And number 4, genetically, how well is that enzyme working and what can I do to make it work more effectively? Time to go in and look at a little bit more of the specifics around detoxification. It's pretty complicated, and my aim today is to make it seem a little bit more understandable and also manageable, but also for you to realize that if you're not kind of focusing on these detoxification pathways with whatever intervention you're doing, is that this is the reason that it could be completely ineffective. So when you think about the detoxification system, you really want to think about it in 2 phases. You've got your phase 1 and you've got your phase 2. And what's really important is that these 2 phases are both working. And in fact, what's the most important is that your phase 2 detoxification pathway is working effectively. Your worst outcomes from a detox point of view will be when your phase 1 is working too quickly and your phase 2 pathway cannot keep up. Because as we go through and really look at detoxification, what you're going to see is, 1, you might not be effective, but 2, through that detoxification pathway, you can make things worse, not better. So the outcome that you could get is that you don't do anything effective and that you've actually done more damage to the body. And none of us want to do that, right? If we're going to detox, we want it to be working. We don't want to end up with worse outcomes. Phase number 1. This is called your cytochrome P450 pathway, and it is driven by a whole range of your CYP450 enzymes. There is not just one enzyme here, there is about 50 enzymes. And each of those enzymes is responsible for clearing a certain toxin or a certain compound, what we call a substrate. And how effectively each of those enzymes is working is dependent on your genetics. And you can measure those. You can go in. I know how well my enzymes are working in those pathways. But phase 1 is inherently risky, because what phase 1 does is it takes these toxins, and we had just mentioned that a lot of your toxins get stored in body fat. So they're fat soluble. In order to clear them and detox them out through the body, you've actually got to make them more water soluble. So what phase 1 does, part of the role of phase 1 is to make these compounds that you're going to detox more water soluble. But phase 1 makes these toxic compounds even worse. It turns them into compounds that are highly reactive and highly unstable. And these toxic compounds can not only damage your liver, they can damage tissues throughout the body, and they can damage all the way down to your DNA. So this is where, if you're not detoxing right, you can create a lot of problems in the body. So phase 1 takes these compounds and it makes them worse. And now they've got real capacity to damage you. And this is why I was saying before how important it is that your phase 2 pathway is working. Because once phase 1 has made all of these compounds, you want to get them out of the body as quickly as possible. But what you've got to think about here is, well, it's phase 2 that is actually getting them out of the body. If I've been toxic and I've accumulated all of these toxins, wouldn't it make sense that maybe my phase 2 pathway hasn't been working very well to begin with, or that it's overburdened? And you've got to approach every detoxification intervention in understanding that you've got to get this phase 2 pathway working. And phase 2 is complicated. There's a whole range of different pathways. There are things like your sulfation pathway, your glycination pathway, acetylation, the ability to conjugate your glutathione. So there's, at least 6 key steps in your phase 2. And again, your genetics is determining how well they work. So if we go in and we look at your sulfation pathway, there's a whole range of sulfation type enzymes that are driving that pathway. So if you're clearing a toxin that has to go out through the sulfation pathway, you need to make sure that pathway is working, because if it isn't, you're not going to be able to clear it. And we can go in and we can track the activity of each of these enzymes in these really critical phase 2 pathways. I want you to think about all the different types of detoxification programs or different interventions that you've tried. And I'd be really shocked if one of you said, I haven't done any of that. I reckon most people have tried quite a lot of them. And what I want to do now is go in and debunk some common detoxification myths so that you can get a good idea of why you don't want to be doing these particular interventions. And the first one is fasting. So a lot of people, when they go to do a detoxification program, they just decide that they're just not going to eat at all and they're going to cleanse their body. And that is a terrible way to detox. And that might surprise you, right? You think, oh, I don't know. I'm hearing all of this stuff about intermittent fasting and fasting. People are doing sometimes 2, 3, even longer fasting. The thing to know is that fasting, there may be a whole range of reasons that people are undertaking different types of fasting. And we know that fasting can have impact in quite different ways. But if you're looking to use fasting as an effective detoxification method, it's not going to do a really good job for you. And in fact, this is where you may end up creating a lot more harm than good. And the reason is that, first of all, detoxification is an energy-intensive process. You need a lot of energy to drive these enzymes. Now, if you're not eating, then where is that energy going to come from? Especially if you're doing it over more than one day, your body is either going to go in and burn some of that body fat. And what's it going to do? It's going to release a whole lot of those toxins, but it will also go in and burn some muscle mass. And you don't want to lose muscle through any of these detoxification interventions. Losing muscle is not a good outcome across any of your health parameters. So one, you take away your energy source and you're forcing your body to find that somewhere else. We know that you need a whole range of really important nutrients in order to make sure that you can deal with all of these free radicals that are being produced. So when your phase 1 is working and you produce all of these toxins, you're producing a very high level of these free radicals, and they need to be removed out of the body. And again, a lot of your detoxification, your antioxidant enzyme system is very nutrient dependent. So as you strip all of your nutrients out, you're interfering with the way that your antioxidant enzymes work. You don't want to do that. You want to be making choices from a dietary point of view that support your detoxification enzymes, that support your antioxidant enzymes. And the research is there is we know what those foods are. It's about choosing the right kinds of foods, not just kind of removing all foods and then putting these enzymes and their activity at risk. If you're going to kind of use diet around your detoxification, the first thing is that you would get rid of all things like your sugar and your alcohol. And, a lot of people confuse cleaning up their diet with detoxification. They're not the same things, but you would certainly want to get rid of sugar and alcohol. And maybe not just for when you detox, but looking at decreasing the intake of those in your diet day in and day out, like move towards a better and healthier diet. Absolutely get rid of your ultra-processed and processed foods. Move over to a diet that is a whole food diet and organic if possible, and then focus on the fruits and the veggies and the foods that are going to have this direct impact on your own antioxidant system. So you would not want to fast, you would want to get very specific around your diet. Researchers are, kind of really interested in this whole detoxification pathway. And as we're seeing more research around genetics and the activity of these enzymes and the foods that can interact with these enzymes, there's been some researchers that have gone away, and what they've done is they've designed these kind of almost like a meal replacement, but they're a whole food powder. And what they've done is they've got a group of people and they've put them on a detox program for 28 days. And what they've given them is this very specifically formulated powder. And it's designed to work through these enzyme systems. And I'm going to kind of read out to you some statistics from this research, because what I know is that you can do things around your diet that are completely ineffective and maybe make things worse, but you can do things with your diet that actually have a very profound impact. So during the course of this 28-day detox program, they checked all of these parameters. And what they found was that there were no significant changes or adverse effects, either physically or emotionally, from being on this 28-day. So no kind of negative outcomes. They saw a 23% increase in what we call the levels of this antioxidant enzyme called superoxide dismutase, your number one antioxidant enzyme. They managed to increase that by 23% by putting the right foods and ingredients into this powder. They saw a 13% increase in the enzyme that conjugates your toxins to your glutathione. And again, that allows you to actually clear them out through the body. So they had a 13% increase in the enzyme that does that conjugation. They saw a 40% increase across the board in antioxidant capacity. And again, you've got to be quenching these free radicals. They're the things that are going to damage you between your phase 1 and your phase 2. And they saw a 13% decrease in a whole range of different reactive oxygen species. So you can have a very effective detoxification intervention, but you've got to know what you're doing. It often surprises people that by making the right choices from a dietary point of view, how profound your impact is. So it might have been the first time today that you realized that you had all of these different detoxification enzymes, all of these different antioxidant enzymes, and that you could be really specific with your food choices to either upregulate or downregulate them. But I want you to kind of take you a little bit outside of that. And for all these people who are taking warfarin, warfarin is a drug that is given to people who've got problems with clotting. So it helps to prevent clots. But you've got to be really careful with warfarin. Its therapeutic window is really tight. Take too much and you start to bleed out and hemorrhage, but take too little and you don't dissolve those clots and you haven't achieved your outcomes. Now, anyone who's on warfarin will realize when they go in and look at their little panel, they've always been told you can't eat grapefruit or have grapefruit juice while you're taking warfarin. And the reason for that being is that, as I was saying to you, your detoxification enzymes are clearing a whole range of prescription drugs. So your warfarin is cleared by a very particular enzyme. It is called CYP3A4. And we know that grapefruit decreases the activity of this enzyme. So if you're taking warfarin and this enzyme is being used to clear it out, and you drink grapefruit juice, you're going to slow down the clearance of your warfarin and you're going to run the risk of hemorrhaging and bleeding out. And so this is how profoundly your foods can have that impact. Now, just as there are foods that are down-regulating the activity of that CYP3A4, there are also foods that can upregulate it. Genetic researchers have said, why are we still prescribing warfarin without going in and looking first at the activity of this enzyme? There are so many people having adverse effects from that drug, and we know that by going in and looking, people could start on lower doses or higher doses and have better outcomes and better safety parameters as well. And, in the future, you won't be taking those kind of drugs without first looking at those enzyme pathways, not just worrying a little bit about grapefruit, but looking and going, how do we start by better and more safely prescribing these kinds of drugs? Another detoxification method is these foot patches. Have any of you done that? So what they are is that you go and buy a box of foot patches and, doesn't it sound so wonderful? You just pull one of these out of the box, you slap it onto the bottom of your feet, you go to bed and sleep, and while you're sleeping, these little foot patches are going to just detox you. They're going to pull all of those little nasty toxins out. And when you get up in the morning, you're going to pull it off and it's going to be all brown and sticky and kind of gross. And you're going to go, great, I've effectively detoxed. It is a load of rubbish. I'm sorry to tell you. Any one of you who have tried it or who actively have this, stop it. There is absolutely no scientific evidence to support that. In fact, in the US, the Federal Trade Commission has banned some of these companies because what they're saying and how they're promoting this product is completely fraudulent. And you might think, well, how many people are doing that? And I went in and I looked at how much money is being spent globally on people using these foot patches. And it is just over $2 billion per year. So in 2023, $2 billion was spent on these foot patches. That's an enormous amount of money to be spending on things that don't work. And, people are doing it because, one, I think on some level we're gullible. We seem to think, that sounds great, and we don't really think about it. We don't do our research. We're taking at face value the marketing being presented here, and it's all hype and it's actively fraudulent, is that you need to be a little bit more discerning around, what are you engaging with and will it work? And so for any of you using these foot patches, and it's a lot of you, $2 billion being spent per year, that's a lot of people putting them on their feet at night, it is not working. Another detoxification intervention that's I see quite popular these days, particularly in these little places where you get your massages or you go to these spas is that you put your foot or your feet in those little baths, and they put this little rod in there, and you sit there and you watch this water begin to turn all brown. And what everyone's telling you is that all of those toxins are being pulled out of your body. Again, it is a load of rubbish. There is no scientific evidence to support that. Researchers have gone in and go, no, it doesn't work. And that discoloration is really because, you're putting a certain type of an electrode in. They're often putting certain salts in there, and that reaction is what is causing the water to turn brown. It is not the toxins being pulled out of your body. And I think part of it is we just think, oh, isn't that so easy? Just stick on a patch, put my foot in this little bowl for 20 minutes and I'm detoxing. You're just spending a lot of money on going nowhere. Another intervention here around detoxification that has kind of, if you go onto TikTok now, I love going in and looking at what's trending on TikTok, is something called navel pulling. And what it is, it's putting castor oil within the belly button and then kind of putting a little patch over it. And, this navel pulling is being promoted as a detoxification, like it's going to pull out these toxins. It's going to burn your body fat. And in some cases, it's like it's going to go in and dissolve all of these cancer tumors in your body. It is doing none of that. And so, it's really trending on TikTok right now. And I started to see pictures of women, putting these little patches on before they go to bed and, talking about how amazing it is. Again, there is no scientific research that sits behind that. It is just another one of those myths. You might think, well, how many people are doing it? Right now, this year, $200 million was spent on buying these little patches that you put over your navel. $200 million. And they are expecting that to double by 2030. So again, there's all of these detoxification interventions being promoted in the marketplace. Most of them don't work, so consumer beware. I hope you learned something interesting today from listening to this podcast, especially around this whole process of detoxification. As I always say, this information is not to be taken as medical advice. It's really just to give you a lot more understanding around key processes so you can make better decisions. If you have enjoyed the podcast, please go in and like and subscribe. Send it off to people who are, doing these foot baths or these foot patches or this navel pulling, getting them to realize that, a lot of what is being done is just completely ineffective. But to know this process of detoxification is really important within the body. We are overburdening our detoxification pathways because we just live in such a polluted environment with lots of chemicals and pesticides that are persistent. So it makes a lot of sense to get this pathway supported, and you can do that very effectively. You can use your genetic information to go in and look at the enzyme system that is doing this, assess how well it's working, and be very specific with your diet and your supplements to impact around the function of these enzymes. You can effectively detox, but so much of what's being done is just not working. Thanks for listening to the podcast today. If we've started to increase your interest around clinical genetics and you think you would like to find out a little bit more, please feel welcome to reach out to us at iDNA Health Clinic. We're proud partners of this Genetics Decoded podcast. It's a real opportunity to get in touch with us and find out how you could go down this pathway yourself. If you liked the podcast, enjoyed it today, please go in and push all the buttons, like and subscribe. It really does make a difference and supports what we're trying to do here. We have a podcast release every Monday, so keep a watch out. All of our topics are around genetics and health, and we would love you to join us every week.